talk this afternoon is some practical insights into making these Gen AI projects work specifically in South Africa. So we'll take you through some of the lessons that we've learned and some of the research out there in the market. So thanks for having us. I want to start off by just talking about the practical implications that we've seen in our market. So I believe that we can talk about this topic as we've done it pretty successfully in South Africa. So as it stands now, this is last month's stats. We have more than 164 live AI agents, assistants, and services in production with customers. We processed just over 21 billion Gen AI production tokens last month. So we split it out specifically. POCs is a different topic. And more than 1.7 individual user requests processed through our platform. This is all in South Africa. And I think this underlines the fact that AI can scale in our local market and can be production ready. We have just over 160,000 users, unique users on the platform that participated in September. And some of the brands that trust us show that corporate South Africa is actually ready for this. And this is quite interesting if you look at the talk today. This does not align to the global stats. South Africa is adopting Gen AI quicker than most global companies. And we see tier 1 companies actually deploying this in production. Thanks. The bad news is that if you look at the global research, specifically the MIT studies, they say that 95% of Gen AI projects to date have not returned any value or has just been cancelled. So that's quite a shocking statistic if you look at it obviously from a risk perspective from a corporate. And a lot of the reasons we'll discuss now that we see in the market, but it was quite easy to get going and build some really flashy demos in terms of chatbots and assistants. But they simply don't scale. And it's not because companies are not trying. Most companies, or many companies, have tested this with demos and with prototypes, but they never got into production. Now, obviously, that's quite a challenge for us. So while we see it fails, is in the world of Gen AI, common sense seemed to have gone out the door. It was mostly a discussion about look at this cool tool and how we implement the tool in the business. It was never actually about what are the value drivers, why are we doing this at all. It was more led by tools than it was led by business saying here's a specific need that we have. So this is one of the contributors. We also saw initially this moved so quickly. So you look at, and I'm sure everybody threw out stats today, and most presenters make up stats. In fact, 85% is made up on the spot. So we see that there wasn't a lot of platforms for Gen AI specifically. So most other enterprise systems are quite mature, but this evolved so quickly to the space where currently we have almost 2 billion users globally using Gen AI every day. So the systems and the companies just didn't grow quick enough, and stuff was implemented without the foundation. So that was another cause, is people use point-to-point applications in an enterprise space. What we know is that Gen AI works incredibly well for consumers, and the stats all say that. It's really cool for brisket recipes or how to prune your trees or whatever. And obviously, if the AI says put some arsenic in your brisket, you're not going to do that. You're going to use common sense. But the moment you do that in enterprise, there was just none of these systems in place to help you. It was always a technology thing instead of a business thing, which is surprising because all other projects in corporate and enterprise is led by a business problem, and then you use technology as a resource to solve it. This was the other way around. And then what also happened was, and we see this every day, the CEO and the board says we need AI and we want it now, and then people just go find stuff just to put tools in place. There was so much pressure in the beginning of last year to just do something. People just like randomly pick some use cases. The poor CIOs wanted to stay relevant, so they just put POCs and prototypes together. And that led to globally this massive failure rate. Fortunately, as I said, we don't necessarily see that in South Africa at the moment. So, and we've got a nice recipe that we want to share with you today that we believe helped us get to that point. So I'm going to hand over to Xander.
Thanks. Thanks, Andre. I'm actually the guy on the program. Nice to meet everybody. So one of the issues we see in enterprises today is just value leaks, and this is what sort of hinders adoption or people don't consider during adoption. And one of the issues that we pick up quite often is just shadow AI, and that's part of what we want to talk about. So employees use personal ChatGPTs, Claude, subscriptions, Gemini all over the place, and because the internal tools are either too slow or there's just tool sprawl everywhere. So your IT department and your security department's playing blindfolded whack-a-mole to get people to do things the right way, and that's what the platform helps you enable. The other component in terms of tool sprawl is everybody's got existing vendors internally, and everybody claims they're doing AI internally. So you've got your many big names in here, which I won't call out, but everybody's building some AI tool, and everybody sells exactly the same thing. So you've got 10 tools that are doing the same thing that no one's adopting, or that you don't have visibility on, just to say that you're doing AI. Pilot churn is quite a big issue as well. Andre mentions that in the beginning. It's just demos look great in conference rooms. We tick a box on the CIO's checklist for the KPI for the year. But when you start integrating into the larger enterprise, it just doesn't scale. Probably because it was built on a single VM without underlying infrastructure. Research also brings up an additional component which we like to benchmark ourselves against. Is just we see skill set being quite a big component in AI adoption, and one of the components that they mention is that young people are being encouraged to teach, I want to say older people, or technically challenged people, how to use Gen AI. But the problem with that is you create these novice traps. And with novice traps, younger people don't have the experience in the business, and they try to create sort of human workarounds instead of trying to redesign the solution or redesign the processes. These value leaks are one of the big things, or the 4 big things that we see in terms of why POCs or why pilots fail. And our component is that it's not to fix or to wait for better models, it's to build better platforms. So I just want to talk to you guys about what the jagged frontier is, and don't know if you've heard about the component, but this is also found in some of the MIT research papers globally. Gen AI has a boundary, and inside the boundary, it's really good at what it does. It's reliable, it's excellent at document extraction, pattern recognition, draft generation, and it's really good with clear inputs and clear outputs, right? And here MIT finds that that gives you a 40% boost in production. Outside that boundary, it really struggles. That's where we have novel problems, context-dependent judgment, strategic thinking, lack of knowledge in your environment. They did a study where they looked at 700 consultants to determine knowledge within their consultancy spaces, and they actually saw that Gen AI just actually downgraded their production capacity by 19% because it just doesn't have the context, right? So the other component there is users can't really tell the difference when AI is right and wrong because it's so convincing. And the component that a platform brings is to be able to help you understand when you're crossing that boundary. And to put this into simple terms, it's just, self-driving cars are really good on the highway where there's lines and it's clear line of sight. But when it's rainy and it's in a construction environment, someone needs to know when to take the wheel. And that's just sort of the jagged frontier.
What we also believe is that this is the one technology that all business units will eventually use. And every single department in any company will eventually use. So you need a bit of a different process here. So normally governance, and for those who know me, I'm not the biggest on governance myself, and brings bureaucracy. But in this case, think of bigger companies. So think of groups that's got 10 or 12 or even 100 subsidiaries trading. Everybody and every single department will eventually use Gen AI as a tool. So imagine now you have to onboard hundreds of vendors, you have to onboard hundreds of platforms, and then there's these concepts. I just briefly heard the previous speakers talk about evals. That's like the holy grail of Gen AI, is to test every single assistant or every function against a quality set. Now, in order to build hundreds of golden eval sets across hundreds of departments, it's just wasteful and it literally slows down the whole process. So our advice is definitely, and we see that, you have to have a platform architecture at the very least, where you pre-approve certain concepts across the business. And we see that with almost all of our enterprise customers at the moment who are successful, is they've adopted some sort of architecture where they say, for the group, this is the way we handle certain of these, what we call trust and security management protocols, where you do evaluations, quality, security, those kind of things. If you do it like that in a group context, your deployment is so much faster, because now you can have certain things pre-built, like certain guardrails against content safety. You can have certain things in terms of testing models, and we'll talk a little bit later about just the investment in models and what's happening in the global world, and it's going to be really important to pre-vet certain model catalogs in order to use it in the business. So we see a big difference between those enterprises having like a corporate and a governed framework and policies in terms of platform architecture and how to deploy this kind of stuff.
Cool. So what does a platform-first approach actually look like? We call this at CohesionX the red layer. Not the red team, just the red layer. And this is what you ship before you actually build a use case. It's the base architecture, the thing that people keep forgetting when they're running demos, so that it's integratable and scalable and it runs within your necessary security context. On that, we take a zero trust architecture. I'm sure you would have heard these in all of your speeches today, but I can't stress the importance of the success of this. The 80% of the work is just normal software engineering. And that's what the platform brings. Then observability, everything that interacts with an LLM or an AI component needs to be tracked and logged. Costs to decisions need to be tracked, not just token spend. Guardrails, obviously, we keep on reinforcing this, that boundary, understanding when the boundary is crossed. And majority of the time when the boundary is crossed, it's not a system component, it's a human component. That brings us back into within the boundary. And data management. Everybody doesn't want their data leaving their organization, and with a platform, you deploy the stack inside your environment, and you host it there, and nothing leaves. Traceability. Everybody wants to know who made the decision, whether they got declined for their credit card, or whether someone made a legal decision. So who approved what and when, and how was it based? That's quite important. MIT calls this shift from humans plus machines to humans multiplied by machines. And that's what matters here. Users should never also think that they're using AI. It should be intelligence embedded into the fabric of your organization, just like the network layer or the security layer.
Our approach has been very successful for us anyway, in terms of and I want to draw a parallel between deployments and enterprise versus our productization approach. We took an approach that you have to have a real end use case in mind, and then you build back from that. So in other words, be super specific. Don't build an assistant or a workflow that helps the procurement team. Build an assistant that helps the contracting component in the procurement team. Do it really, really well. Get it absolutely perfect and make sure that it is adopted by the users, and then you productize it. So we started off with some key capabilities, and then we productized this as we rolled it out to multiple customers. Now that is what we would recommend in terms of picking your use cases. Pick the use cases that's the easiest to deliver with the highest value, number one, and make sure it is super, super specific. What we see generally, and this is all the research that's available and the stuff at the moment says the same thing. If you apply a general language model, a large language model in a business, it is typically between 70 and 85% accurate on any given question. Now again, back to my brisket thing, that's pretty good if you want to do cooking at home. But if you want to process invoices or extract supplier onboarding documentation, and you want to make sure it's 100% accurate, obviously that's not going to work. The more specific the use case is inside a department, and the more specific your solve is, the better you can manage the quality. And then you build out the use case from that perspective into a product. Now that's the approach that we took. Everything in our stack has at least one production customer using it daily, and that's how we iterate on it and then build it out. And that's sort of like the approach that works really well. What Xander said is so true. I think what we will see in the next year is that we're going to move away from even calling these AI projects. It has to be part of the fabric, it has to be invisible. Now, think of onboarding a new vendor at a big enterprise and there's 100 documents, including ID documents and CRPC documents, and you've got hundreds of stuff in there. Now, traditionally, someone had to sit through the documents, retype it. What we see is, in an AI workflow, that just happens automatically. Everything is pre-populated, and the user says, wow, that was quite cool. But they don't need to know that AI actually sat behind that process. That's how you want to approach these kind of projects. And it is very often the less sexy use cases, or at the moment, that delivers the value. It's the back office stuff more than we've got some cool front-end stuff. You can go to Wheelie, the car guy's website, and try their AI search. Within 5 seconds, in any language, you can type in all of your requirements, mix languages, and you find your car. That's sexy and cool, and that's what a lot of companies think AI is. But what we see is the value sits more processing invoices, looking for mistakes on documents, where people use their discretion to do the edge cases on normal administrative tasks. That's where the big value lies. So our advice there is be very specific on the use case, build it out from that. That's been our product approach also. So we're going to talk about 2 specific use cases now.
We're going to talk about one of our products, Iris. This is not a sell, it's just to show you that it's real. It does exist. So the problem that we faced in one of our customer environments is that they receive hundreds, if not thousands, of food safety lab reports a day in their QC department. They've got an entire data and analytics team that's just supposed to determine trends, whether their suppliers are staying within check. And the way that they used to consume that is by having a team of people just ingest those different lab reports manually into spreadsheets and then into a database, so that what we think the really, really smart people are, so that they can do the math on top of that. And what we found is that this is not an impossible task. There's tools out there that does this. I mean, everybody's heard of OCR. There's lots of workflow engines that ingest things, and there's lots of PDF scanners. The problem here is the variability. If you've got 18 times 3 different variances, and everybody calls something else, that becomes difficult to code it discreetly. And the AI is really good at the semantics behind this. So Iris is a Gen AI extraction tool. It basically looks at the file type, and it can do all types of files except MP4. I'm putting that out there because I don't want to build it now. And it then determines what extraction it should do. What is interesting about this product is we built it a few months back, and quite recently we found quite a few papers that echo the sentiment and the capability. So from a validation perspective, we see this as excelling within the boundary. Like in terms of how you do document extraction.
We have got customers doing the audit reports with us. We've got lab reports, we process invoices. In fact, I think we've got just over 50 instances running in corporates with this capability, and it really augments those teams. The second tool that we want to show you is called Atlas, and this was initially developed for a very large law firm that's got 475,000, 430, I told you we make up the stats, 430,000 SharePoint sites with more than 50 million documents. So, and it's essentially that law firm's complete digital library over a period of, as long as everything's been digital. So you can imagine a normal keyword search just doesn't work. So we built a system, an agentic system that essentially looks at very unstructured data, where you can essentially put into the system, I need all the contracts with Anglo that had to do with rehabilitation between 1995 and 97, and I want all the suspended conditions in those contracts. Like literally you would ask an assistant, it then goes through a library and a wealth of data, and then either fetches the documents or interprets them or compares them.
Andre, yeah, so just to add on to what Andre said is, Atlas isn't just like Copilot Enterprise. It doesn't just search based on the metadata of the document or the name. We actually embed all the contents of the SharePoint. So we've got 4 types of searches running in parallel. So semantic, using embedded information, metadata, keywords, and external web if needed. And then we've got an actual planning agent that decides which one should come up and which one should give you the answers. It then gets ranked by a graph network. And yes, this does take a little while, up to probably 30 seconds sometimes if it's not cached and readily available, but it saves them hours and hours trying to navigate where things should be.
So if we switch to deployments in South Africa, what we're seeing is what they call the Gen AI divide, where you've got massive adoption bottom up in companies. So some research says 86% in the US is actually estimated to closer to 95% of employees are using AI tools. Again, like I said, only 3% typically use paid accounts. So for those who understand how scary that is, you work in a bank, you use your private ChatGPT account, you upload customers' detail, you think it's fine because AI technology is more safe. Meanwhile, that becomes part of the training cycle on a free account. So you've got 86% adoption, let's settle on that. Yet only 13% of South African companies have any AI strategy, policy, framework, any documentation. So that's quite scary. The users are using it. The problem is it's not integrated, it's not linked to the company data sources, and it's actually not safe at all. You don't have that quality. So we're at an inflection point where corporate South Africa is going to have to do something to address this. Otherwise, I think there's going to be a lot of risk for businesses. What we do believe is this is the one thing that should sit at board level, not at IT level. And I know that most of my customers are CIOs, but we believe that AI governance should sit at a board level, one step above, because I think it's going to be part of your overall corporate governance process. And I think it's quite important that we recognize that there has to be some approach in terms of making that happen. The other thing that, and this is a bit of a switch, what is really interesting at the moment is the work that's being done on the foundational models. At the moment, we all know ChatGPT and let's say GPT-5 that sits behind it. Some of you who maybe code knows Claude and Anthropic, and they are currently what's called the frontier model providers. It's closed circuit. Those are the models that currently lead the market. However, if you look at the investment in the US this year, most of the investment is actually made by Google, on Gemini, by XAI, Grok, by other players like even Facebook is investing literally hundreds of billions of dollars into training. They're building these AI factories where the power source, the processing, the chips, everything is integrated into these training data centers. So what that tells us is that whatever we think is winning today and is leading the charge is definitely not by next year this time. By next year this time there will be new entrants. Whoever's the best by end of next year might not even exist today. So what that tells us is absolutely critical when you design your platforms and your architecture that you don't associate with one model only or one provider, because it is inevitable that they're going to get disrupted fundamentally. Also, there is this enormous multiple of cost differences. If you take DeepSeek, which there's a lot of propaganda that they're going to steal your data, it's actually an open source model. You can run it on your own hardware. No one can steal anything. If you run DeepSeek, your cost per token is, let's say, $30 per million tokens. You compare that to Anthropic at like $3 or whatever. It's ridiculous. It's multiple. It's like 50x or 100x the cost. The quality difference in some use cases is zero. So I think it's critical to consider multi-model switching. The world might change in such a way that we have small language models that specialist in compliance or governance or health and safety or whatever, that is far more accurate, that costs a fraction of that. So whatever architecture is designed, it is critical to look at the value you get out of it and where you need reasoning, where you don't need reasoning, where you need small models. And the bottom line is to keep your designs completely agnostic of the provider, is my advice anyway. So what we would say, this comes from a practical perspective. The talk was about how do we unlock value quickly and how do we make sure that we're not part of the 95% of failures out there. So from our perspective, this is our recipe. we set out to deliver value in month 1. The world has changed, in our opinion, of where you traditionally in the software development cycle do 6 months of planning and speccing and then brief it in. The technology moves too quickly, so we believe that if you got your TRISM platform in other words, your traceability, your security, your compliance components in place, that should happen in month 1. While deploying the project, you should look at audits of what AI tools are used, how are you going to replace it with company-controlled AI tools. So you should take month 1 in terms of deploying the basic core platform before you start looking at use cases, and then connecting it to the company's data. So whether it's structured or unstructured data sources, wire it up in month 1. Month 2, you start deploying actual assistants. To deploy RAG assistants in today's world shouldn't take longer than a month. And it should be of high quality where you then onboard your champions in the business to own it, to obviously do the evaluations, make sure that you've got your subject matter experts confirming the quality. Typically, we see this works really well. We believe that no Gen AI project should run for 2 months without something being live in, at least in QA. And then we believe that in month 3, you should start wiring up the use cases into more agentic flows. Maybe not super advanced agentic agents, but the difference is like the examples Xander showed. It's one thing to demo to a company that you can extract the lab reports. It's a different thing infusing it into the ERP process that it just happens and everything gets filed and no one does it. That's the key. So by month 3, you need to wire it into production so that the company uses it. Now, ironically, this is our approach that we followed for this year. And the MIT report, incidentally, that came out now says exactly the same thing. If your pilots and your Gen AI projects doesn't yield any measurable value in 90 days, you should sunset it. And you should move to the next one. Otherwise, you pick the use cases wrong. So we typically say you should start with picking the 3 most important use cases, and that is within that boundary of capability. And if you do that, your success rate will be higher, and then you should hold your vendors and your partners and your teams accountable to move at a pace where you can prove the value before it's a 6-month project without any value.
Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen. Any questions from the audience?
Hi, how are you doing? My name is Hotatso. Sorry, I missed the first 10 minutes. So I just want to understand one thing. Are you guys like consultants that come in and help companies build out all of this? Because I'm just trying to understand as a company what that pricing would look like from your point of view, like am I paying for hours, and then obviously the whatever software and stuff. And then number 2, I get what you're talking about, but so many companies' data is such a mess, and just like the whole architecture. So how do you guys solve for that? Because before, a lot of the time before you can actually start implementing effective AI solutions, don't you have to fix that whole architecture, etc.? So I just want to know your approach to that.
Okay, thanks. So on the consulting thing, we're only consultants today. So we don't offer that service as a rule. I know, however, I've seen many of those guys walk around that does that. So I'm sure there are lots of consulting houses. I think it's going to be an important thing to address. Our role is more specifically around the application platform that we built. So our customers typically consume that on a subscription. And then as part of the deployment, we try and take a lot of the consulting out of it so that it's a little bit more affordable and quicker to value. So that's the first thing. I'll start the data question and then Xander can take over. So certainly, in order, AI is like many other systems. If you've got better quality data, your results will be better. Typically, you won't find any business where all the data is perfect. That's why use case selection is so important. Most medium-sized enterprises in South Africa can probably come up with 100 Gen AI use cases. So pick the ones where the data is a little bit in a better shape. One last point on that before I hand over to what's your name, Xander, is that what makes Gen AI quite remarkable is its ability to understand unstructured data. So that's the big difference, and that's probably why it was so successful. You can quite literally point it at a SharePoint folder with chaos and then extract value out of that, which Atlas, by the way, does. So I think that it's a little bit easier than an ERP implementation or something like that. Want to add to that?
Yeah, I think just to add to Andre, I don't think there's a golden thread answer for messy data. Unstructured data, yes, but part of what we highlight is that, you know, we work with you on the journey, even though it's a subscription-based component, but we would probably steer away from trying to redesign your warehouse because that's not our skill set. So, you know, that we wouldn't take on something like that as a rule. I don't know. Say again?
Do you guys own the product?
The product that we sell, yes. We built it South African-based.
So I just want to ask a question regarding where you mentioned that the tool is able to generate audit reports, but then how do you manage that? Because not all processes are mature enough to audit, but what level of maturity is required regarding those and the type of audit reports are generated?
Yeah. So firstly, we only allow questions where we know the answers to. That was the first rule. So if I understand it correctly, I mean, every process is different. So typically you would set up the agent to understand the benchmark. So in our context, the examples we would use is one of the big retailers uses it to do their audit reports for their stores, which is a combination of traditional financial audit, like on cash-ups, but also quality audits on merchandising and so on. So they've got a set framework and essentially a framework against which they audit. So we train that in, or we set that up in the agent, and then essentially the raw data gets compared to that, and that makes it quite feasible to do those kind of processes.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Really good presentation. Quick question on, I want to say Atlas, the documents, the one you built for the one you built for the lawyers.
Oh, okay, that's Atlas.
Atlas. All right. Given that you're going through about 50 million documents and 430,000 SharePoint sites, and ultimately some of the answers to the questions the lawyers would be asking would probably be used for actual casework. What process did you use to effectively test for accuracy and detect hallucination, basically, and then prove that accuracy back to the lawyers who would then be liable if they provide incorrect advice to their clients or use it in case law?
Yeah, so it's not final, but the anti-hallucination components actually come from the lawyers itself, and we just build those in as tool sets into Atlas. So that gets done that way, but also all of these things are disclaimed, and at the end of the day, it is a lawyer making the decision, and it is a lawyer who can retrieve the actual documentation from what the AI is giving it, right? So the AI in this case is by no means telling anybody what to do, and we are quite firm on that.
Just to add to that, typical, that's why golden evals is so important. So the way we benchmark all the tools again is in the example that you used, we don't allow the model to use its own knowledge base at all. We feed the information. So the agent that translates your question into a set of tools that fetches the documents, but those documents are used to answer the question. So that might still give you an incorrect document. So in this case, and this is quite an interesting approach, this specific customer is the biggest law firm in Africa, and their approach is different to the universities. They say, please use the tools, but ultimately you as the lawyer are accountable, responsible for your final answer. You use AI to get to that, but check your sources. So there's a component that technology can address, but similarly to any other research, the final human has to make that determination of whether they use it or not. Follow-up question.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So I think it's a good point, and I think the other thing that we kind of discount is that often when it comes to systems that do this, somehow the bar is zero defect. But yet, how do we test humans on doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
But so in that legal example, are they accountable from a risk perspective that there's a disclaimer, there's references to the documents that were used to actually generate the answer, and that ultimately it is the human lawyer who is then responsible for... Okay, great, thank you.
So 100% what's important, but we also do work in the medicine space. So for one of the pharmaceutical companies, which is even more important. So we do cite the reference document, and there is a disclaimer. So we just facilitate the research to get to that document, but the lawyer or the pharmacist or the doctor must still use that source document. My opinion is it's still more accurate than the best people. And one final thought is, if you listen to all the analysts, including the founders of these big AI companies, the consensus is between 12 and 20 months from today, the first model will exist that's smarter than the smartest human on the planet in terms of IQ. That's a general fact. Between Google, Elon, everybody, they are convinced 12 to 20 months. So if you now start using those kind of capabilities in the tool set, it's going to get very accurate. And I think that we probably, like you said, people expect AI to be 100%, but they still allow humans to make lots of mistakes. What's the pass rate at Turkey's now? 50%. So you just have to know 50%. Anyway, so I think that we're heading in the right direction.
How's it, guys? So I liked the plan that you had between your 30-day, 60-day, and 90-day. So in terms of your successful implementations across multiple industries, what would you say would be the biggest lesson you've learned besides failing fast?
I said we only allow questions where we know the answers. So,
That's a good one.
yeah, that is a really good question. So I think that it's actually got less to do with the maturity of the company and their AI journey. I think use case selection is absolutely key. And we've got a team that does that exclusively. So they look at, number one, what is the impact of the use case? How good a match is it to that boundary? Because that's the key, the boundary of the capabilities of Gen AI. If you go outside of that, it becomes infinitely more difficult than inside the boundary. So we match the use case and the value of the use case versus the capability of Gen AI, and then we match it to the maturity of that department. Because typically, and one of our customers is in the audience, we've seen that even in one company, there it is, we've seen that some departments are just so much more ready and the ownership is so much better in the department that their use case just works immediately, whereas other departments simply fail. So I think it's a combination of the sponsorship in your customer combined with that use case selection is key at this stage.
I want to answer.
Yeah, please answer.
I want to add that, and I think this is a really controversial point because I'm an engineer in that sense, is like, where we've succeeded, we've been lucky to break down the solution small enough and find people willing to use it. That drives the success, the change, the willingness to change what they're doing currently. I would say that is probably, and whether that's luck or we just know how to find them, then
On your 90-day roll-up plan, you guys said somewhere that you publish the explainability to the champions, and then the champions then get trained, right, at some point. How do you select the champions? And I'm assuming these are business champions that are non-technical. So what sort of like selection process goes into that?
It's always the subject matter specialist. So in the case, again, let's go back to the case that we demoed in the lab reports, there was someone who already owned the process. So they understand the challenges and they had to solve it. So you make that person the champion, and then you unfortunately have to give away some IP in the process because you have to explain how you get to that. You have to show the traces, how you get to the result that they trusted and that they can understand it, and then they own the process internally and operationalize and industrialize it. That's the key, because without that, you build a really cool prototype and a really cool demo that never gets deployed. So that's almost like the pivotal point to move it over into production. Thank you.